Hi everyone, my name's Jess Moore. I'm CEO at Social Enterprise Australia. We are the national peak body for social enterprise. We're for an economy that puts people and planet first and for unlocking the power of social enterprise to help get us there. As part of our work, we host events for people across the social enterprise ecosystem to share knowledge and experience and to build connection. We're so excited about this report and excited to host today's conversation. The Social Enterprise National Strategy focuses on 5 areas where social enterprise can drive big impact. One of the 5 is access to decent work. Work integration social enterprises, or WISEs, have a distinct role to play. They create jobs and pathways to employment and self-employment for those most shut out of work. They combine real work settings with wraparound support. And in communities with too few jobs, they create new ones. But many people don't know what social enterprise is or how to get involved, and we need better systems so that more social enterprises can reach their potential. Today, Westpac Foundation and GoodWolf partners, alongside people doing the work on the ground, will take us through a practical conversation on what it really takes to build, sustain, and fund successful WISEs across Australia. Before I hand over to them, I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands from which we're all joining today. I'm thankful to be on beautiful Dharawal land and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I also pay respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining today's conversation. I recognise that these lands were never ceded and that connection to land, waters, and culture is ongoing. A few things to note about today's session. First, this is being recorded and the recording will be made available on Understory in the coming weeks. There is also time for questions and answers today, and we also welcome comments and reflections in the chat function. What does it really take to build and sustain a successful WISE, and what does effective funding of WISE look like? Westpac Foundation and GoodWolf partners have worked alongside WISE leaders, funders, and sector experts across Australia to explore these questions in depth. The result is Working Better Together WISE Learnbook, a new resource grounded in real-world experience, challenges, and insights from across the sector. This webinar marks the public launch of the WISE Learnbook and brings those insights to life through a practical, practitioner-led conversation. In a moment, I'll hand over to Sally McKeoch and Lisa Waldron from the Westpac Foundation to introduce themselves, this report and its context. Nina Yusufpour and Loretta Bollerton from GoodWolf Partners will then take us through the report, how they went about it, and the key themes and findings. Loretta will then facilitate a conversation with WISE leaders Alexi Seller from Impact North and Sally Quinn from Green Collect. I always feel hilarious when I use the term WISE leaders. They are WISE, but in that instance, I mean work integration social enterprise leaders. We'll then open up to Q&A. Whether you're running a social enterprise, funding one, or working to support the sector, we intend this session to provide practical insights and tools to inform your work. With that, it's my pleasure to hand over to Sally and Lisa to kick off this conversation.
Thanks so much, Jess. Appreciate that introduction. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Lisa Waldron, Senior Advisor at Westpac Foundation, and I'm grateful to be on Wurundjeri land today. It's great to see so many people here who care deeply about the future of social enterprise and inclusive employment. But before we get into the insights and findings, I'd just like to start briefly by sharing who we are and why today matters for us. Westpac Foundation was established over 140 years ago and has worked for that time to help and support people experiencing disadvantage. But for the last 2 decades, our focus has been on supporting social enterprises to help create real jobs for people who face significant barriers to employment. The last decade has been specifically focused on work integration social enterprises. Our approach was really grounded in evidence that meaningful employment empowers families and communities, and it strengthens society as a whole, and that expands economic inclusion in Australia. And that's why we've focused on social enterprise for so long. We invested about $35 million over with 90 social enterprises between 2006 and 2026. And over that time, it really became clear that funding alone is really never the full story. We also set ourselves a long-term goal to help our partners create 10,000 jobs by 2030. And that goal was reached 5 years early. So since 2015, our social enterprise grant partners have created nearly 12,000 jobs for people. And what sat behind that approach was a holistic and long-term approach with flexible funding, deep partnerships, and a willingness to play roles beyond our traditional grant making. We were acted as learners, conveners, and catalysts. And our unrestricted grants were really designed to create this pipeline of social enterprises to support all at the different stages of development. Alongside that, we also had and supported initiatives to strengthen financial sustainability through investment readiness, access to loan guarantees, and as many of you may know, collaboration with other co-funders. So we invested in capability, resilience, leadership, governance, financial management, impact measurement. We drew on the skills and enthusiasm of our passionate Westpac staff through an ambassador program, as well as investing in intermediaries and the broader ecosystem. And at that broader sector level, we also led and engaged in research and a broad range of collaborative initiatives to really try and help promote and advocate for the role of social enterprise in creating a more inclusive economy. So over the last 20 years, we've learned a great deal about what it takes for WISEs to succeed, including the true cost of impact and the role that philanthropy can play in strengthening the sector as a whole. I'll just now hand over to Sally to continue the story for another few minutes, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. So I'm also a senior advisor at Westpac Foundation, and it's just so wonderful to see so many of our social enterprise community online today for what's quite an important moment in both Lisa and my journey in the sector and the foundations. So Westpac Foundation announced a really significant shift in September last year, which meant a refocusing of the strategy on literacy and numeracy outcomes for children in under-resourced communities. And as part of that transition, we spoke to a lot of our partners and co-funders who asked us, so what next? Can you share some of your learnings and case studies openly and practically with the sector? And so the Learn Book is really the coming together of that idea. It was a part of a broader $1 million transition fund, which we sought to provide both direct support to our social enterprise partners and investment in key sector initiatives. We really wanted to create sort of a runway or a bridge for our partners as we were transitioning out of the sector to secure other funding and support. So the Learn Book draws not just on our insights over the past 20 years, but the insights of other social enterprises, collaborating funders, and sector intermediaries. It's really a joint effort. And it's designed to be really practical, not theoretical, to support both funders and practitioners to continue this really important work of building a stronger, more resilient, wise sector. And it's really an important part of sort of changing systems, I think, as philanthropy, to turn the mirror on your own practices and mindsets. Listen deeply to those at the front lines of the sector and be honest with each other about what it really takes to create impact together. We think the Learn Book really helps to lift the lid on the complexity, the tensions, the hard-earned insights that don't always make it into those glossy impact reports, but they matter deeply to us all in the sector. So the Learn Book has 3 parts, which you'll hear about. We've got our core learnings over the sort of 2 decades of funding, which Loretta and Nina will talk to in this session. We worked on 4 really in-depth case studies, bringing these learnings to life. And there's also a practical grant-making guide designed specifically for funders to share everything that we've learned as funders in the space alongside our co-funders as well in the WISE sector. So this work wouldn't have been possible without the generosity, honesty of all of our partners and funders and intermediaries who participated in this work, and we want to really thank you for bringing this to life with us. So although Westpac Foundation strategy has changed, we still have the Westpac Scholars Social Change Fellowship, which is a bespoke offering for social enterprise leaders. So we'd love everyone to keep that in mind as we move forward. And obviously there's always skill volunteering opportunities available through Westpac. So for us, the Learn Book isn't a definitive guide on WISE, it's a starting point, which we hope will be part of an ongoing conversation about philanthropy and how we can better support alongside our partners in building more inclusive, decent work for Australians. So we're really looking forward to the discussion ahead, and it's my pleasure to hand over now to Nina for GoodWolf, who will take you through the findings. And thanks to the GoodWolf team again for all of their support in this project.
Thanks, Sally, and thank you both, Lisa and Sally. And for those of you who've asked about slides, I think there's more coming soon. But Nina here, Director from GoodWolf, which is the social impact advisory team that has supported the Westpac Foundation team, Amy, Sally and Lisa in this process. Our work is across philanthropy, not-for-profit and social enterprise sectors, and it's really been, I think, a privilege to be invited into this process and essentially, which is one of Westpac's departing gifts to the sector as it shifts its strategy. So extending a big thank you to the Westpac Foundation team for their commitment to this work and sharing the learnings of over 2 decades of what has been really transformational work. I know that in GoodWolf's own work, we have seen some of the challenges experienced in WISE's and social enterprise sector more broadly, and developing this resource, I think, has been a worthy exercise for all involved, a somewhat synthesising of all of the experiences. And I guess through this process, there's been a real question as well about, who will step in now to champion this space, particularly as Westpac has shifted its strategy. And that's been very much part of our conversations in developing the resource. As the sector adjusts, there is opportunity for new leadership and new champions to emerge. And there's certainly a lot of kind of individuals behind this WISE and social enterprise movement. I guess to build on the why behind this work that Lisa and Sally have already commented on, a really interesting insight through the project. There was one particular social enterprise, very strong business model at the more commercial end of the WISE spectrum. And you'll see in the resource there is, quite a diverse representation of views. We're not kind of favouring one view over the other. But this was quite a commercial social WISE that was ready to triple in size. Even then, it struggled to access the capital and support to really develop and grow its business. A lot of WISEs are structured as not-for-profits, not all of them, but a lot of them. And not-for-profits, mainstream traditional finance is usually out of reach. So voluntary directors are not in a position to provide directors' guarantees. And capital is often required to be a little bit more patient. And I think this was an example where Westpac came in and provided a blended approach. And today we have solutions like the White Box Self Fund that offer, that type of capital to enterprises. But it's just an illustration of the challenges. All businesses require capital and different types of support. And when you have the complexity of working with disadvantaged cohorts, there's some additional considerations around what, capital and support are needed against what stage. So I guess, work integrated social enterprise, it obviously plays a critical role in employment pathways, and there's demand and interest in it, particularly from philanthropy and government, but there is a limited shared understanding of what it really takes, as Sally mentioned. And they're also operating in an increasingly complex environment, and it's harder kind of to deliver impact at scale when you factor in rising costs, margins and other factors around complexity. There's a gap between the expectations and reality in how WISEs are funded and supported. And I guess this resource kind of comes at the right time to talk to a lot of those learnings. In terms of the process to develop the Learn Book, I did just want to thank everyone. So this was very much a collective effort. While we have drawn from a lot of Westpac's learnings over the last 2 decades, There's learnings all across the sector. So we used a working out loud methodology. We had 2 advisory groups, one WISE advisory group, and I'd like to thank Ability Enterprises, All Things Equal, Barmer Services, Impact North, and we've got Alexi joining us today. Nunda Community Enterprise Cooperative, Sisterworks and Whitebox. And our second advisory group was funders and supporters. So I'd like to thank the Brian M. Davis Charitable Foundation, the English Family Foundation, Greater Melbourne, the Honig Foundation, Ian Potter, Macquarie Group Foundation, McLean Foundation, Minderoo, Minter Ellison, Paul Ramsey Foundation, VFFF, and of course Westpac. The 4 case studies that were mentioned, these offer deeper insights into some of the challenges and what leaders and organisations have experienced in having to shift and respond to complexity. So they're Australian Spatial Analytics, Dismantle, which as we speak is undergoing some changes, Free to Feed, which was around for 10 years. And I'd just like to acknowledge this was an organisation that Loretta founded, and Loretta has now joined the GoodWolf team and really led this process. And Green Collect, and we'll hear from Sally today on that. Next slide, I think, just in terms of the resource, we were cutting it really fine. So we've had around 4 months for this process, and the main link is not available at present, but will be tomorrow. And so we will contact you all with the link to it. It will be structured in 3 components. So there's the main resource, there's the appendices, which are a lot of Westpac's grant making tools and guides that they would like to leave the sector with. And then there's the set of 4 case studies that you can have a look at too. I'd like to thank SEA for offering to house the resource. It's great that it has an ongoing home. So it'll be available on Understory, and Philanthropy Australia has also offered to house it on the Better Giving Hub as well. We will continue to share this, so there'll be a couple of events post this that we'll be looking at, but please feel free to use different pieces as you as social enterprise leaders go and talk about the challenges and opportunities in the sector. It's the whole purpose of the resource. That's enough from me. I'll hand over to Loretta.
Thanks so much, Nina. So it's a really, as you've heard from Nina, what we've created together with the sector is quite a juicy resource. It goes through some of the foundations of WISE, but then builds into some of the key insights. It's replete with quotes and first-hand lived experience of WISE leaders, both throughout the resource and through the case studies. So I encourage you to have a good read with a cup of tea. I guess today I wanted to go through and share a few of the kind of key takeaways. So without getting into the details of the resource, step back and look at those key takeaways for philanthropy, for WISE and across the system. And then we'll have a conversation with Alexi and Sally, who we're very grateful have joined us today. So the role of philanthropy, I guess a big acknowledgement that alongside Westpac, the philanthropic sector has been feeling its way through over the last decade. And what we wanted to do is take the learnings that we've heard and to distill that into some key takeaways for philanthropy, and acknowledging the work that's already been done to date. The first piece that we wanted to highlight for philanthropy is to start with impacts. Really what this is an invitation to not only a very small group of existing WISE funders, but an invitation to other funders and philanthropists to come on in. WISE funding does not need to be only for WISE funders. When you look at the broader philanthropic priorities, youth, people with a disability, justice, regional disadvantage, people seeking asylum and refugees, etc., there is a real opportunity for a broader pool of funders to come in looking at these impact areas and get around and support WISE. What we wanted to highlight here is that we've seen some funders see WISE as a little bit of a dirty word, and perhaps not want to go there because of the complexity in the model. And this resource and this project is really just an invitation to come on in. I also wanted to highlight the role of philanthropy in shaping the sector and acknowledge that funding preferences to date have really influenced which models scale, which geographies thrive, and which voices have been heard. There's been a historic emphasis on scale and transitional employment models in particular, which has unintentionally narrowed what success looks like. And through this resource, you will see that we try to highlight that there is no one size fits all approach for WISE. In regional areas, for example, transitional employment may not be the best model. Actually, a long-term job for life might actually be the best option to respond to the issues in that local community. So our invitation here is for philanthropy to listen carefully to WISE and to acknowledge that their work and their funding preferences and profiles shapes the sector. We acknowledge that the focus on jobs targets, what we've heard, is that as a key metric has within WISE distorted decision making and at times led to premature growth. So philanthropy is really uniquely placed to support WISEs to fund their resilience and impact costs and not just their expansion. We wanted to also highlight that short-term competitive funding creates instability. And just acknowledge that when philanthropy is on the journey with WISE and it's backing growth, that to look at and prepare for ongoing multi-year support to minimize the risk of funding cliffs in a very dynamic market. We wanted to call out that sustainability expectations need recalibration. In fact, one of the things that we think is holding the sector back is different viewpoints on sustainability. We know that what we've heard is that sustainability for some WISE is about mission continuity and building a diverse range of revenue sources. It's not always about looking at one moment in time at profitability or breaking even from commercial income. And expectations for year-on-year growth or that decrease in reliance on philanthropy often push WISE to simplify their forecasts to meet the needs of the funder, rather than put forward something a little bit more nuanced and engage in a conversation. We wanted to bring, to highlight to philanthropy and to funders to fund, to plan for challenges, not just success, to build resilience within WISE and to increase survival rates. We know that conversations around downside scenarios and around risk and when things don't go to plan should happen early. And finally, I wanted to just share, and I think that this is a really wonderful legacy of the Westpac Foundation and Lisa and Sally and how they've worked alongside WISE for their what I wanted to highlight here is to balance trust with proportionate due diligence. And I think they really struck the right balance. Trust is obviously really essential to good philanthropic practice. And it works really well when paired with fit for purpose due diligence and capability support. I think what the Westpac Foundation did well, and you'll see in the tools that they've left behind, is that through the process of doing due diligence to receive funding, they actually build the capability and bring awareness to not only the WISE, but its governance structure as well. And it's a really good way of working. So we're lucky to have these tools left behind. We'll move to the next slide, please. Key learnings for WISE. Look, I think it's no coincidence that there is only 4 key takeaways here. It was very hard to distill the key learnings for WISE, and we know that WISE leaders have the answers within themselves. So I think I just wanted to highlight here that through the case studies, what we wanted to impart with WISE is to grow in response to realistic demand. Expansion into new geographies, ventures, or cohorts should be driven by confirmed market demand and supported by realistic financial buffers and diverse revenue sources. The ASA, Australian Spatial Analytics case study, illustrates this really well. A core learning for ASA is that future geographic expansion should be customer-driven and contract-led, rather than it establishing new sites or new projects in anticipation of demand. So thanks, Jeff, for your participation. And to plan with rigor rather than pressure to scale. Scenario plan and model realistic impact costs and forecasts. Funders play such a powerful role in influencing scaling strategies and can support WISE to align funding with the most appropriate and sustainable long-term strategy for their impact and business model. And what we want to do is set aside any power imbalances there. And the key takeaway for WISE is to have an honest conversation around the ongoing role of your impact costs and how your forecasts and models are built. And that means including not being afraid to have conversations early about possible risks or worst case scenarios so that you're well supported into the future. And finally, when we look at policy and systems, we know that WISE are delivering strong employment outcomes. We've seen this through the research, but they're not well supported by existing systems. A couple of call outs on the systems and policy level. The first is that a more aligned advocacy effort is required to demonstrate the value and support to create a more enabling environment. With Westpac stepping out, we're looking for new champions to come in and to represent WISE alongside Social Enterprise Australia and other peak bodies to bring WISE onto the government agenda. In terms of data and evidence, there's been a huge investment in understanding impact costs, but less in understanding WISE outcomes and impacts beyond the individual beneficiary. So aggregated sector data is needed, and we'd love to see some investment in that space. And the role of philanthropy, I guess just acknowledging that philanthropy and government need to walk side by side. And the opportunity to fund collaborations and sector coordination is equally as important, but there are multiple roles for funders to hold to fund individual WISE and at that systems level too. Awesome. So we're really lucky today to be joined by Sally Quinn, the founder and CEO of Green Collects, and Alexi Seller, the CEO of Impact North, also herself a social entrepreneur and founder. I think we can pop down that screen. There we are. Great. So Alexi and Sally, I'm really privileged to be in conversation with you both today. You're both phenomenal and reputable leaders. I think you need no introduction. I'm really grateful for your participation in the WISE Learn Book. GoodWolf appreciated your counsel through this process. What we heard through this process is that WISE don't operate on a single model, as Nina mentioned. They sit on a spectrum between more charity-oriented and more commercially-oriented approaches, particularly in relation to their revenue mix, with all models along that spectrum creating meaningful impact, but having different requirements ongoing. The Learn Book's replete with quotes around sustainability, the role of philanthropy, and the role of the market, sometimes encouraging caution to over-relying on trade. And for other WISE leaders, there's a strong sentiment that commercial viability has to come first to plan for the future. We also heard quite definitively from Dr. Libby Ward-Christie that for most WISEs, impact costs are a significant portion of their total costs, and it's unlikely that revenue from trade can fully fund those costs ongoing. Overall, we noted that there was a persistent confusion around what WISE sustainability means in practice and its limitations to sector maturity and alignment. So Sally, I guess in your experience with Green Collects, I invite you to share how can we better understand sustainability?
Thanks, Loretta, and thanks for having me. It's really lovely to be here with friends in the ecosystem. And I guess to speak as a practitioner and hopefully sharing some of the voice of the people we're here to serve who shape the work we do and whose lives are very important to consider in this conversation. So I guess, for me, intentionally starting a WISE, but the term work integrated social enterprise wasn't around 20 years ago, but very much at the heart of Green Collect's purpose was to create jobs where there were gaps in terms of people being able to access work at times where they needed it most. So in that 20 years, there's been lots of adapting and lots of learning around what sustainability means. And I guess when I think about the key elements that we've had to adapt to or respond to, the big one is the market. So we run a business. So the market is changing. Its needs are changing. We need to anticipate those. We need to offer a product and service that is relevant to them. We need to reach them. We need to be able to deliver it in a way that our costs aren't exceeding what we're charging. So the business landscape changes as a lot. So that's one of the key factors in why sustainability can vary over time. Then I think about the social sector that we're part of. So we're looking at job creation, we're looking at support. So we're looking at who else is in this system and how are they acting? What are they doing? There's a lot of change there in relation to philanthropy's focus, like Loretta said, around geography or funding types. And then, of course, there's the impact model itself that has had to adapt and grow in response to the community's needs and the needs of our community. And as we consider what is a high quality job and how is that structured in terms of hours of employment, training, transition. So these three things are all at play constantly. And there's a lot of change within each of those, and there's a real need to balance those things. And I think that's where sustainability is not a linear journey that goes like this, because we're responding to things in the market right now that are affecting those three things. And I guess, an example is at the moment, the market is really tough. Businesses are holding back, being a bit slower to say yes to business, particularly in environmental areas. That then impacts job demand. And we've learned to create a model that works with the business, not at odds with the business, so that when business is growing, we can respond and increase work. But sometimes funding can impact that if we have an internal goal or there's an external goal around job creation from a funder, and yet business has decreased. We're trying to deliver. Do we reduce people's hours? Do we change the type of work people are doing? There's just so many factors to keep that balance of sustainability. And I guess in terms of that journey to sustainability, we started Green Collect with a $30,000 loan. So we didn't have capital to invest to create the enterprise. So it took us 5 to 7 years to get to, now I'm going to use percentages, which aren't, I don't think, the whole story and can be tricky, but I want to illustrate that through sharing. In 5 to 7 years, we were covering about 50% of our operating costs and impact costs through trading. And then over the next 15 years, we fluctuated between 60 and 90% over time. And we're sitting at about 70% now. And there are so many things that come to play in that mix. And I guess when I think about the lived experience as a practitioner, someone running an enterprise around sustainability, what it actually means to me is on a day-to-day basis, when I come to work here, I am going to be able to carry out the work we need to do, the day's work, smoothly with the resources we need to do the day's work, to focus on what we need to achieve in terms of trucks coming in, items being processed, people being supported. So sustainability is about to do the day's work without having to change priorities, because there's a crisis we're managing often around cash flow at the moment. So the day-to-day is the big experience of being sustainable, but also the thing always in the back of our mind, and the phrase, I think it was Valley of Death or something like that in the Learn book, this confidence that not only can we deliver today, but we are going to be able to sustain our purposes and draw on the tools and options we need to sustain the business into the future. So there's this everyday element of sustainability, and then there's, are we going to have the tools and options we need to ride out the market, to ride out the changes in the sector, to stay on track with our purposes?
Thank you, Sally.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I could say a lot more, but
I know you could. It is really a hot topic. And we heard so much from the leaders around moving away from, as you mentioned, these sort of fixed percentages. And I like that idea of viewing a wise along in their journey, that they might be moving towards this, a sort of higher revenue generation, and then moving back at certain times. It really does reflect the nuance. Alexi, I guess what key messages from the Learn book and your experience would you share with funders when it comes to shaping the view of sustainability and impact costs?
Thanks, Loretta and Sally. It's so many things to share from your experience there. It's a lot when you go straight into the sustainability question. I just wanted to share as well that I think a lot of my reflections in this process and now also come from my time leading Pollinate Group across India and Nepal, because that was, to Sally's point, a work integrated social enterprise without us even knowing, and actually finished my role there before I became aware of the WISE movement. So I'm somewhat reprogramming some of our thinking there to align with how it's talked about now. I think the really key thing is this. The first thing I would say is that sustainability, how it comes to me as a practitioner, kind of experiencing the conversation with funders, is almost like a proxy for talking about risk. And we could just have the conversation on risk instead of talking about like getting sustainable, especially because sustainability off trade, if we're imagining that's the pathway, isn't necessarily a solution. Like, it doesn't remove risk. It doesn't necessarily control the outcome or make things better or more impactful. It feels more, and I think proxy is a really useful term, because the sort of broader conversation that I'm interested in having is like, what's underneath these questions? Why are we asking these questions? And is there something real to consider there about the assumptions we're making maybe on both sides of this partnership about what the future might look like and what's the right decision for this particular moment. The other piece I wanted to share is just, Sally was reflecting on that journey of trade proportion in the organization. And I just wanted to kind of share a bit of the storyline of Pollinate in terms of its model. So it came from a mission of enabling access to energy in very poor communities through a sales network. And they were actually entrepreneurs. They then graduated to an employment structure because of the nature of the work, and that was a shift we had to make. And then we made quite a big mission shift, recognizing that we could do much more impactful work if we enabled women who lived in those communities to start their own business supplying the same product line. And so then they became the entrepreneurs. And then there was a really ethical question of how much of a profit margin we can hold from women who come from extreme poverty selling a product. And all through that journey, if I'm honest, at the get-go, like, our heads as a founder group were very focused on break even. It was one of the first conversations we had as co-founders. And like, we had this model of a sales agent needs to sell 40 lights in a month, and then bam, this thing can scale and it will be highly successful. And somewhat I'm surprised at how long it took us to get there, but I think it did take about 5 years for me to finally say, okay, we need to let go of that, like that really narrow view of break even being success for us, because there's different things here that we now know and we're experiencing, and other ways, ways that we can do much deeper impact if we relieve ourselves of that pressure. And that's what allowed a complete shift in our mission that has then, enabled much deeper impact with women across. It was a merger with Nepal, like expanded the network massively. Since my departure, they've again made a shift to working with other organizations who have women networks and enabling them to start their own business in whatever it is, and actually reduced staff count through that journey. So there's a really interesting exploration there of, like, over time, understanding what you're trying to do, what the impact is you're trying to achieve. There will be variance in your model, there'll be variance in your trade, there'll be variance in lots of things. And the real focus there is like aligning on what it is, where it is that you're trying to go in the partnership, and supporting that to continue.
Thanks so much, Alexi, and thank you for peppering that and bringing colour with your own experience at Pollinate. One of the quotes that jumps out in the Learn book really is about abandoning a fixed position around revenue composition, and actually zooming out and taking a longer term view around sustainability. And one of the WISE leaders talked about how that they were approaching that with their funders, zooming out and asking, can we continue to deliver on our mission into the long term? And what is that time frame? And how are we measuring success around that? So there's a little gem around that within the resource. Another interesting theme was the relationship between risk and failure. There was this sense, and I've got a quote, hopefully within the Learn book, if not within a notebook somewhere. And this may have been from someone from our philanthropic advisory group. And they said fear of failure is holding back honest conversations about risk and truly unlocking the role of risk capital. Alexi, the conversation about risk and failure also connects closely to some of the pressures that we heard from Wisers to scale. And I guess, and perhaps not understanding the different types of scale available to them. And I know this is something that Sally from Westpac is very passionate about, so I encourage you to pick her brain in the future. But from your perspective, what advice would you give to wise leaders who are weighing up whether, when, and how to scale?
Yeah, it's a huge question. And I think there was something in there as well about resisting the pressure, scaling for purpose, not pressure, or something as well, like being really mindful of why that step is being taken and where the demand is coming from. So is that demand truly coming from the groups who will enable the model to function in a way, as opposed to just like a fund is important as well, but it's not the only contributor to that journey. I do think, and this is a process we're on right now at Impact North, which is, not in the WISE context, but just in any organization, and particularly in a nonprofit space where your funding may be insecure, really focusing on the impact scale first, as opposed to the growth of the organization. Like that doesn't necessarily translate to impact scale, and Pollinate's sort of recent transition, I think, articulates that really clearly.
So by that, Alexi, you mean focusing on the growth of the impact, the number of individuals that can come in and receive employment, or the change in the system that sits around that impact.
Yeah, and there can be many ways. I think what's really hard, like personally, my experience as being a founder, is you spend the early years of setting up and growing your business, and your job is to convince everyone around you that this is a great idea. And everyone should come with you on the journey. And like that comes to staff, it comes to funders, like people you're working with in community. And there is a moment where, in my experience, you start to switch over to, okay, like we now have to question some of these early assumptions, right? Because you do need to, in a way, persuade to see a thing tested and explored and understood. And then you need to catch yourself as a leader and think about whether you're just continuing to go down this path that you established a long time ago, or if you're actually listening to what's going on in today's current state. And that is a really hard thing to do. And it's actually only happened for me, like in both of my sort of CEO roles, usually through some kind of external force that's just forced me to take a different look at where we're going and what we're doing. It's not an easy journey. So I think for leaders of wise leaders out there are many, having that conversation amongst ourselves and just kind of, finding a safe place to genuinely question, like you probably have doubts about your model. I do. I've had doubts about everything that I have built across these organizations all the time. I have very few people I can voice those doubts with. I usually find my peers are the best, because there's a common understanding that, like, yeah, we all understand we're kind of skating along a thing here and trying to make sense of ideas in our head and see how they land in practice. But it's really, really important we continue to have those honest conversations. And I think the more honest we are with ourselves as leaders and with our own teams, the more we permit that conversation to happen, where different ways of thinking about it can be uncovered. If everyone thinks that you know what you're doing and you know which direction you're heading and you're 100% certain that that outcome will be achieved, I think I made the joke in the advisory book, like everyone's breaking even in 3 years, because you say to everything, like you can, that's what the numbers say. But if that's the strong message you're sending, then people just start to kind of follow that message, and there's not space to say, hey, this could be done in a very different way, or like I genuinely have fears and concerns about why we're heading on that direction. And it does require some vulnerability from leadership. And it's like I'm laughing at myself at the moment, because like I feel like I'm on the second run of this journey, and I still fell into the same trap. And I was like, oh God, I thought I knew how to do this, and I've just completely ignored my earlier learnings, which is another part of learning. But it is really, really important we can have those conversations. Your staff are really critical in this too, because they will be usually the source of all the great ideas that can support different thinking. And scale, like, for all of the controversy around the word that is there, it's useful to think about, like, we have big problems in the world. Everyone who's in this room wants to see solutions to big problems. It's quite hard then to hold yourself to a place where you're like, oh, I'm not going to scale anymore because like this is just practical and real. Like, I think a lot of us might feel kind of disempowered by that approach of like we actually want to see ourselves as being able to work together to create a collective impact. And saying just not scale then like limits our vision, I guess, and our motivation and our drive to carry on and continue to navigate these hard things. And so I guess I just advise like scale with nuance, right? Think about all of the options, consider how you can do it differently, like let it be an open source collaboration so that different ways of thinking can come in, because there's more than one way. But as a founder, I've found you tend to lock in to an early model like from the beginning, and it's quite hard to move away from that.
Thank you, Alexi. I really appreciate that. I appreciate the call to reflect, and I think the new phrase is doubt out loud alongside your peers and funders as you're planning for scale. Sally, through Green Collect's story and case study, you've experienced firsthand that intersection of risk, of innovation, of scale. When plans shift or assumptions are tested, what can these moments reveal, and how can funders and wise leaders respond better? We've just got a couple of minutes, so if you can keep your answer quite succinct, please. Big question for a succinct answer.
Yeah, I think Alexi touched on that ability to have the real conversation, to be vulnerable and just say how it is. And there's lots of reasons why sometimes we don't want to do that. I had a conversation just yesterday with a bank, and it was a traditional bank, business services, and talked about some hardships. And the person on the other end of the phone, who was not part of this sector, just said, oh yeah, that's happening for businesses all the time. We can defer a payment for 3 months or something. And I just was kind of like, I felt normal. And it was like, I've had so many of these conversations this week, and it really normalized, this happens to all types of businesses, and to kind of get this response that, we can do something about that for you today, So that's probably not what I really want to talk about, but I think, it lends thinking about how you're going to be received sometimes, shifts the way you position something. And I really, I think it stems back to some of the assumptions underneath, like that if you're still relying on 30% external funding, you haven't quite made the gold standard. So you're feeling in a deficit position, rather than going, wow, you're 70% covering your charitable purposes through 70% of that. Philanthropy or government only needs to supplement 30. So the assumptions underneath then shape how we feel in crisis too. And I guess what happened to us is we really needed immediate action. We knew what we needed to do. Things were not going to plan. We very quickly identified the levers we had internally to really shift things. But we knew that would cost. To restructure the organisation was going to cost us. There were going to be costs we felt sooner to achieve what we needed to for the sustainability in the short to medium term. We couldn't get anyone to contribute to any of those costs. So it needed to come immediately. So we were able to source friends and family loans to actually enable us to restructure. We achieved all of the things we needed to in that restructure. And there was some really amazing funding that came from the WISE grant, which I really want to acknowledge, that group of funders who came in and responded to a range of enterprises like ours. But for us, that was 9 months after we actually had to act, and we needed to act immediately. And we weren't able to access any assistance to do that. So we drew on people who believed in the mission, who were related to the organisation. So there was something really missing in being able to have the honest conversation, activate levers, not just internally, external levers to enable that.
Thank you so much, Sally. I think, I encourage, once you get the Learn book in your hands, everyone to jump into the Green Collect case study. Sally, you're so generous with your feedback and advice, and having been through, the roller coaster that is running any kind of business. And yeah, there's some key learnings at the back for not only Wise, but for some funders as well. And thank you for being so candid and sharing your story. And yeah, thank you both, and wish you both the best of luck with your enterprises and the support you're offering, Alexi. I'll hand over to Nina now, just so that we can bring in, have a wider conversation with anything that's bubbling in the chat. Thanks, Nina.
Thanks, Sally and Alexi. I think just to round that off as well, just to kind of note that most major industries in Australia are subsidised. So I think we have different mindsets that we apply to different things, and sometimes the baby goes out with the bathwater when we apply that logic or don't apply that logic in different sectors. There's a couple of questions in the chat. The first is from Adam Oaknall from Gandel Foundation. Thank you, Adam. And Sally and Lisa, I might just piggyback one that I have as well that's connected to that. So the first part being, not every funder has the capability to do the kind of due diligence that's required when it comes to Wise or social enterprise. It's a bit different from, straight charity initiatives. And then Adam's piece, I think, is around risk. And are you able to share an example of a risk that you took with a funding relationship that you're most proud of, and whether it paid off?
Thanks, Nina. I'll just jump in, and Lisa, feel free to dive in after me if you want to add anything. Just to maybe touch on Adam's question first. I mean, sure, there's been a lot of instances where our partners have approached us with a significant cash flow issue that required flexible or new funding to support them through a sort of really considered plan out of that particular situation. And it's very difficult to kind of mention specific enterprises in this context. But yeah, I mean, as a funder, you could look at that and go, well, even with the funding that we can provide, that's actually not going to serve the needs of that organisation at this particular time. That's a risk. But I guess the way that we looked at it, and we've really cultivated this approach over the past 5 or 6 years, being a relatively small funder in the sector, was, well, who else can we bring in around this? Like, who are the other funders of that organisation? How can we convene a collective approach and use our commitment to this funding as sort of leverage to bring other people in? So that I guess that's how we've sort of tried to really work in the sector. And, we've not always been able to play that role, but where we can, it has been effective. And so I guess just to call out to other foundations on the call that, like, if you've got partners that really need support, bring in others around you and build the case for that support, because it does take definitely more than one funder to kind of wrap their arms around these organisations. And the question about due diligence, I mean, yes, we were very fortunate being a corporate foundation to be able to pull in, risk and finance expert bankers that, were able to help us with that due diligence, which we then sort of leveraged and shared. But, the WISE grant, which has been mentioned on this call, is another model to think about. We worked collectively as 9 foundations to combine that due diligence, and that process is actually documented in the appendix of the Learn Book, the grant making guide. So even as a small funder, pooling your funds as part of a collaborative really helps to leverage the muscle across a range of foundations in due diligence. And the benefit of a collaborative approach, obviously, too, is so much shared learning and capability building happens in that forum for funders. So for those funders on the call that haven't heard about it, the WISE grant is definitely a fantastic way to share risk and share the load around things like due diligence. And if people want to follow that up, just get in touch with the Greater Melbourne Foundation.
I'll just briefly add, thanks, Sally. Adam, we also, I guess, structured the case studies around an analogy that was brought up at the Jobs Summit last year around the iceberg and the Titanic sailing to America. and trying to avoid the icebergs along the way. And so these case studies in the Learn book, I guess, talk and really showcase that. And as Sally and Alexi have just sort of highlighted, that social enterprise sustainability isn't just about avoiding risk. It's really about having the right capabilities, the relationships and the funding structures to actually navigate it. And for us as funders, the role isn't just to fund success above that iceberg, but understand and support really what sits beneath it. And really to help some organisations who can see those icebergs navigate around them. So we've got some really, very proud of some of those stories that we've been able to support organisations as they navigate around those icebergs, not just as they're leaving Ireland to get to New York safely. So hopefully those case studies will also give you a sense of those that are approaching and some that actually unfortunately did hit that proverbial iceberg as well. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Lisa and Sally. There are a list of questions here. We unfortunately won't get time to go through them all, but if you reach out to us separately around some of those, we can answer them directly. I do just want to go to Richard's question, and he's asking, I think it's you again, Sally and Lisa. What have you found connects with those outside of the WISE sector in terms of, I think what he's getting at is garnering further, support to come into the WISE space, aside from those that are already in the know?
Great question. And Loretta really touched on this strongly in her opening, that one of the key insights that we wanted to share from the Learn book is that WISE produce all different types of amazing social, environmental, economic kind of outcomes for communities. And so people can approach it through a range of different lenses. So, I mean, just off the top of my head, there's a real interest in place-based approaches, for instance, and there'd be a cohort of funders interested in those sorts of approaches. Obviously, a lot of what social enterprises do is to respond to disadvantage or job exclusion in place. So that's one idea. And I think as philanthropy, we need to do a lot better at cross-pollination, and we can get quite siloed. Even in Philanthropy Australia, there's all these different siloed networks, and we need to get better at kind of sharing models and innovations across groups. Again, that's why sort of collective funding approaches can work too, because people can come in and test out even if they don't have really strong knowledge of the WISE community, they can come in and play a part and learn and get involved in networks. But I don't know if Lisa, if you'd have anything to add on that question.
I'm just really conscious of time, so I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks. And I think, at least, Sally, it's a good point. And there's also the IDAC collaboration as well, the Investment Dialogue for Australian Children. So it's a good tip around those funder collabs. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to hand over to Jess Moore to wrap us up.
Thanks, Nina, and big thanks, Sally, Lisa, Loretta, Alexi, and Sally Quinn, for sharing such valuable experiences with us today. All people who want access to decent work should be able to choose it. But that's not the case in Australia currently, and WISEs have a distinct and critical role to play in changing this. My key thought during today's conversation is that WISEs provide a service for which they're not currently paid. So WISEs run businesses, often selling services and products into the market, but they are not paid, for the most part, for the contributions they make around employment outcomes. And that has to change if they are to scale, if they are to realise the contribution that's needed. And I do use that word scale intentionally, because ultimately we do want WISEs collectively to scale their contribution in Australia. We just don't want it to be for perverse reasons. If you work in government and you're on this call today, your government has the power to change this. If you work in philanthropy and you're on this call today, you have a catalytic role that you can play in showing and testing how this can work and change. I want to thank everyone today for joining the call. A huge thanks to the Westpac Foundation and GoodWolf partners. The Westpac Foundation, I want to say, I admire and am so grateful for what you have done in your strategic shift in ensuring that the learnings that you have done in this space are shared broadly and so that they can be built on. I want to say thanks to the Social Enterprise Australia crew in the background who do a lot of invisible work to make events like this happen. And huge thanks to all of you for joining today's call. See you later.